G'day, legends. I hope that you're having a fantastic day. And most importantly, it is a Friday. I hope that you're leading into a fantastic weekend and taking some time off for yourself and your family. Now, as always, we have a lot to talk about. We need to look at strikes down in Crimea, strikes against airfields. We need to look at the US signing off that US weapons can be used inside of Russia. But it's not that simple. There are still some restrictions on that. We need to look at what the US has said about those radar facilities that were hit that we spoke in length about. And then we'll talk about the shells delivered from the Czech initiative and what exactly is happening there, because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. But we'll report on anything and everything, regardless of which way, is happy about it. We'll go over bloody everything. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is former President Donald Trump. Now, today he has been criminally convicted. Now, what I want to say, I don't want to get political, but love him or hate him, it is crazy that this is the first president to have criminal charges brought against him, especially when you look back at some of the other lies and wars and all this launched on other times. But secondly, how will this then affect the war? As many saw him as an end to the war if elected. Now, some feared this as it would likely include land concessions, and others praised this as it would be an end to the war with Russia, but then Russia would maintain the land that they then had occupied at that time. But as well, I don't think other major powers around the world, and this is going beyond just Russia and then China and all these other powers, I don't think they necessarily care who is in the White House. I think the best outcome for them is more division in the American system. Can these other countries defeat America conventionally, militarily? Not even close. But can they gain influence from a unipolar into a multipolar world through America's division? Absolutely. And we are seeing that in other areas around the world. Now, of course, I'm Australian. I don't have a horse in the race for the election coming in November. But from my outside perspective looking in, every time there seems to be a campaign against Trump, it seems that he becomes more powerful out of this. And there's even people saying, well, the website has crashed from so many donations this way. It tends everything like this, reaffirms again what he is saying. I think if they really wanted to not have him in, they'll just don't talk about it. Anyway, that's my 2 cents there. So let's talk about straight off the bat that there could be strikes from US weapons inside of Russia. Now, maybe not as simple as being reported, but we will go over this. Now, what exactly has been said? Now, the US President Joe Biden has given Ukraine permission to strike at targets inside Russia using American weapons, but only to defend Kharkiv. So, of course, here is Ukraine. This is Kharkiv. This is Belgorod. Now, we're expecting at some point and maybe another crossing in Sumy after we saw earlier this month these 2 crossings open up to the north of Kharkiv as well. Russia has intensified attacks around the northeast Kharkiv region, and Ukrainian officials, including Volodymyr Zelensky, have been vocal about weaponry restrictions. Now, why just in Kharkiv? Well, as it states here, Kharkiv is 20 kilometers from the Russian border. So, of course, not being able to strike into here is has far more effect than being able to strike somewhere out here, because all your Russian and logistics, you've got 100 or more kilometers in here, rather than artillery fabs can just be launched straight across. So it is important for Ukraine to have those there. But what actually then is this? Now, I think this is just an initial feel out for then further restrictions to be lifted down the line. And if you listen to my last video on this, I speak about the steps. And in the steps, I said from here onwards, we will see feeling out of restrictions, seeing how people react to it, seeing how Russia react to it as well, and then the lifting of restrictions or tightening back up on of restrictions there as well. And this doesn't only include strikes, this includes more weapon systems, and eventually down the line, I believe, Western troops as well. Maybe come in, like France is going to talk about, I think this week, talk about then maybe third line troops, logistics, and then feeling out, seeing how that goes, and okay, second, then first. And this is exactly like we've seen this creep of systems. No, no tanks, okay? Maybe some bloody whatever the French non-tanks were. Next thing, we've got tanks, okay? No long-range strike capability, okay? Maybe these. And we're seeing that creep. No strikes in Russia, maybe just some strikes in Kharkiv. And we can assume that this is feeling out, and then eventually down the line, we will see strikes in and around. But there's still another restriction on this, lesser talked about. The officials said that US policy would continue to prohibit the Ukrainian military from using ATACMS to a range of 300 kilometers and other long-range US supplied weapons for deep strikes in Russia. So what it is really sounding like to me is yes, but on short, shallow strikes in and around Belgrade, not strikes back up into other areas, purely to count these other frontline openings. But we haven't seen any of those strikes cross over yet. And as we know for a couple of weeks that the French, the Brits have said for long-range capabilities too, but we haven't then seen like Storm Shadows or Scalps heading across this way then either. But an important part in this is that air defense will be opened up to be used within Russia as well against Russian planes and Russian missiles. Now, how much effect will this have? Well, yet we don't know. But there's a couple of questions and warnings in this. Firstly, the question is, what then happens? What would be NATO's response if Russia then target a storage facility, say in Poland or Romania? What would actually happen then? And also that Ukraine, I think, in the beginning of this is going to need to be careful because, of course, it's just opened up a heap of new targets. Straight off the bat, like that, open up a heap of new targets. Ukraine still has a finite amount of ammunition. We know those problems are still there. That this could have an effect on, mass targets open up, saturate those targets, but very quickly you start running low on ammunition again. I guess we will see. The thing is with this creep and restrictions is the more restrictions you lift, the less restrictions then you have. What happens when all the restrictions like this are lifted? What happens if if Russia still has then the initiative in the war? What then is the next step? And yesterday's video, I spoke about that. But it is interesting to see. Now let's talk, we mentioned some shells in there, so let's talk about shells. Now this was from the Financial Times. We've talked about this Czech initiative of the shells. Czech warning comes as domestic and arms producer. This group, the largest ammunition supplier in Central Europe, warned that rising prices and poor quality meant half the shells it had received could not be sent to Ukraine's battlefield. That the leader of CSG told the FT that about 50% of parts acquired by his company on behalf of Czech government in places like Africa and Asia. See, we never saw exactly where these were coming from, but we did speculate, were not good enough to be sent to Ukraine without further work. CSG is forced to add missing components from its own production. Every week the price is going up. It seems to be big issues with the components. It's not an easy job. So that is not running as smoothly as many were hoping. So we talked about strikes then into Russia and we talked about fighter aircraft. So let's then talk about fighter aircraft. Now, importantly, the Danish a foreign minister has said that these Danish F-16s will be allowed to strike within Russia. Ukraine can use what we've donated, including outside its borders, meaning against targets in Russia, as long as it complies with international law. Now, a couple things here. It will still depend on what system is on that rail of that aircraft, because I would say if it was an American bomb at this point on that rail, would America have something to say about that? This is the problem with so many components being in one system. So we will see. But we've spoken about if these planes can't hit within Russia, they will not ever be able to conduct SEAD and DEED. Although the closer and closer they get to the front line, the more and more danger they're going to be in of advanced air defense systems as well. But he does say Ukraine cannot use these aircraft for arbitrary attacks on Russia, saying that, again, like I said, complies with international law. And it would be a catastrophe if we see, when these restrictions are lifted, we see, like we've seen in Belgrade, strikes against targets, their civilian targets, infrastructure as well, that all that could be turned back if that happens. I think there needs to be some very careful planning on what happens here. Now, then we speak about strikes going further in. Well, Rybar has released this of then, of course, the Swedish AWACS aircraft that were going in, but we have no idea what time frame that is. But of course, this is taking into account that it is at 6,000 meters high. Of course, the lower it gets, the less this radar is, but the closer it gets, the more threat it's going to have against the system as well. This is a massive upgrade for Ukraine, but with 2 of them, something you can't afford to lose. So it will be interesting to see exactly how this performs when it enters then the country. Now, we'll talk about strikes, but a friend of mine then sent me this in the video released with President Zelensky meeting F-16 pilots. He said, great OPSEC, so operational security, on our new F-16 pilots. Not what idiots allowed this to happen. So full faces, everything of these guys, of the F-16 pilots. Now, is this a huge deal? Maybe. Is it not? Well, I don't know. I don't know what sort of PID, so protected identity, that Ukraine is running with around pilots of these systems. If there is threat to them being in Europe, at the moment, going down and getting coffee, and what other services may be working there. We have seen both Ukrainian intelligence services and Russian intelligence services carry out strikes on individuals beyond then their own borders, whether Dugin's daughter, who was trying to attack him, or the Russian helicopter pilot who defected over to the west and then was struck only recently as well. So we need to talk about some missiles that were fired into Ukraine last night as well, and what exactly these were targeting. As you can see, all of these are the S-300s, a lot shorter range, so they're striking areas like Kharkiv, but having a lot of success with those, but all striking very much in one area. What is in this area, you ask? Well, it is then this airfield, which is where people are saying that the F-16s will likely be stationed. We've seen multiple attacks on this. We saw one late this month as well, and then this one again. Now, what was the success of these? Again, we don't know. Ukraine has it fully on lockdown of any photographs of strikes anywhere. So we never really know. But Ukrainian pages are saying this. 0 of the S-300s up in the northeast were shot down. 7 of the 11 gay H-101s were shot down, and all the Shaheeds. That is what Ukraine is saying. We, again, don't know exactly. But we know some of these got through. We don't know what the damage would be there. But people are saying, well, why hasn't Russia been striking an airfield like this? Well, we know when the F-16s come in, F-16s do need really well-built runways and a lot of maintenance on these high-performance aircraft. This is why some said something like an F-18 with carrier landing gear may have been a better option, but regardless, we know F-16s have come in and with 2 engines on board. But regardless, F-16s is what's come in, and the Australian ones, apparently we don't want your trash of the F-18s. But regardless, F-16s is what we have. But my say would be, well, if you were to strike this, if there has been noticeable work being done here, why strike it at points along the work, wait for the work to be completed, and then hit the location, not giving the option to move to a secondary location and using the resources already to have built that up. Now, I don't know if exactly what's happening there, but if you read between the lines of Russia specifically targeting one airfield, I'd say that is what we're seeing. Now, I'm seeing a lot of Ukrainian pages suggesting that, well, it doesn't matter because F-16s can land and take off on highways. Yes, but aircraft can only utilize really good condition highways. And these aren't a Cessna. This is a fighter aircraft. They need good condition, straight run of highway. Now, I would suggest that the people saying this haven't driven that much in Ukraine. Yes, there's 100% highways and freeways where this would happen, but we're not talking Swiss highways here. And I would say that, I will say this is not a permanent solution. People are saying, well, just go highway to highway. Okay, an F-16 is like a Formula One car. It's not your Toyota. It's not a Cessna. Cessna needs a lot of maintenance too. But these need, for every bloody hour in the air, massive amount of ground time for ground crew to work on the aircraft. You need somewhere to store the aircraft. You need fuel the aircraft. And this maintenance, storage, rearming, these aren't portable things. You can't just land on this highway here. Yep, fuel, bombs, all the maintenance needs to be done and then off to another highway. It doesn't work like that. There's still going to need to be some permanent then base. So yeah, that is a temporary area on bits and pieces, but you can't just have them there. What I have said and what I have speculated is I think that these could be located, stored, maintained outside of Ukraine. They'll fly in clean, no weapons on board. They will land, weapons go on board, more fuel on board, and then continue on. Now, I'm not saying 100% that's going to happen, but I think that could be a solution. And people say, well, it's coming in unarmed, it's just a plane. I don't know, but I just can't see how, with the limited air defence and how much allocation of air defence is going to have to go to wherever these are stored, even if it's in multiple places, and what location is going to be on the range, how effective that is going to be from just them getting then struck on the ground. I don't know. But we've talked a lot about, what I was going to say, the US weapons being used inside of Russia and Ukrainian strikes inside Russia. Now, we spoke about, and I can't believe this isn't like front page sort of stuff, about the nuclear early warning deterrence radars being hit by Ukrainian drones. We've speculated a lot about that, and I want to speak about this, and I believe this was from the Washington Post. The United States fears that recent Ukrainian drone strikes targeting nuclear early warning systems could dangerously unsettle Moscow at a time when the Biden administration is weighing whether to lift restrictions. So, of course, we've seen some of those restrictions lifted. The US is concerned about Ukraine's recent strikes against Russian ballistic missile early warning sites. And I said that by doing this, Ukraine could potentially shoot themselves in the foot, and the US go, we're not trusting you on all these long-range capabilities into Russia. We don't like what you've hit here. We're not trusting that. And some have asked me, well, why should Ukraine have any restrictions on systems given it? Well, there's no restrictions on domestically produced or bought systems by Ukraine. There's no restrictions on that. But the donated stuff in, I think people have the right to have a restriction on that system. Now, continuing, these sites have not been involved in supporting Russia's war against Ukraine. But they are sensitive locations because Russia could perceive that its strategic deterrent capabilities are being targeted, which could undermine Russia's ability to maintain nuclear deterrence against the United States. And that's from a US official saying they're not being involved. We have looked at the radars. We've looked at what the range on them is, what the the degrees out, 90 degree, 100 degree coverage of that is, and we have said most likely had no involvement in this war, as well as some of them are too close, that the way these work, skipping off, it may not actually be in Ukraine, and they're picking up ICBMs. They want to pick up something at well over 1,000 kilometers above the Earth. A Ukrainian official familiar with the matter, however, said that Russia has used the radar sites to monitor the Ukrainian military activities, particularly Kyiv's use of aerial weaponry, and people have pointed towards ATACMS. But other people have said the ATACMS don't go anywhere near high enough for the range that they're at, and these are facing the wrong direction for this. Ukraine is facing a continuing threat from its existence from a Russian enemy force, which boasts the world's largest nuclear arsenal that has gained ground of late. It is part due to its sophisticated radar and weapons jamming technology, which has rendered virtually useless some US-provided guided missiles and artillery shells, particularly things like the Excalibur shell. We saw I can't remember much, it was like 80 or 90% drop in a few weeks on the effectiveness of areas like this. And I was talking to a guy working in Ukraine who was speaking about EW, and I was like, there is very sophisticated, but I can't share much of what I was sent across. Ukrainian officials said the goal of the strikes was to diminish Russia's ability to track Ukrainian military activities in southern Ukraine. Again, the ones we've seen likely didn't have much involvement, if any, in the war, and the US officials saying here that it had no involvement in the war either. Russia could think it has a diminished ability to detect early nuclear activity against it, which then could become an issue. Again, I think in the situation we're in around the world, we want these early warning systems as good as possible. It should be obvious to everyone that there is no intention whatsoever by the United States, I'll underline this, I'll talk about that, of using nuclear weapons against Russia. But there's certainly concern about how Russia could perceive its deterrent capabilities being targeted and early warning systems being attacked. Yeah, you would. If America was involved in a war and a country involved in that war was striking NORAD, we would perceive that as a threat against it. Now, in this, there's no intention whatsoever by the US of using nuclear weapons against Russia. Now, the US may have no intention of that level of escalation, but like we said, we don't know where this war ends. And like people have said and justified, is their intention by Ukraine to have the US escalate to a degree like this to then have a upper hand in the war? And as well, like we'll speak about in the next one here, could it be perceived that it is directly directed by Washington? We have said this too. Could it be working sort of a false flag attack of a Ukrainian drone came in, but there is an erroneous conviction that the Ukraine's targeting is directed by Washington. But that means the attacks on Kyiv and Russian nuclear deterrence infrastructure has potential to trigger a perilous escalation with the West. At the end of the day, nuclear command and control and early warning sites should be off limits. But we've spoken about this too, that we, I think, are entering a period of war within the next 6-12 months. What scares me the most are false flag events. Could something like this, degrading these systems for then something to make another more powerful country step in. And as one country starts going backwards more and more and more, whether Ukraine has a heap of success with these attacks into Russia and their mobilization, Russia starts moving backwards, or then the other way, could we see something like this from outside then involvement? I think the areas to watch would be particularly the Zap nuclear power plant in here, which we know Russia has military presence at and weapons and mines. And we do know as well, Ukraine has launched both ground attacks across the Dnieper River to that, as well as drone attacks towards it too. It's just, you may not like to hear it, but it's the way it is. And I think that's where we're heading in this war, because I don't see that either Russia or Ukraine has the manpower, the assets to finish their victory goals of what they see. Of course, Russia, we don't. It's a bit more blurry of what they see as complete victory, where Ukraine is through Crimea, through Donetsk as well. And I haven't seen evidence either way of this. Now, there was mass attacks last night from Ukraine against then Crimea, but I will say that the results of this and the size of it, I don't think have yielded the results that many would want. We've had 2 ferries damaged, and at least 2, some are reporting 4, but at least 2 visually, of these KS-701. I've seen people reporting this as a ship. This isn't a ship. This is a glorified fishing boat. Yes, it's a military landing craft, can be used and has been used in military operation. Of course, it is a target, and it is an important target, but it's hardly like you've sunk the Moskva again. Let's not act like it is like that. We'll look at the video of this as well. Now, those 2 boats, those sort of high-speed speedboats, they were targeted here, as you can see. So just to the north of Sevastopol, straight across then here. We will look at the footage. I'm just teasing you at the moment. But we have seen as well, a pilot boat was said to be destroyed here as well. Of course, this is important for bringing ships in and out. But probably more importantly is there are ferries that then take across then instead of the Kerch Strait Bridge here. We have ferries that cross equipment and bits and pieces, well, heavier pieces of equipment that don't cross the bridge too. And we have seen damage to 2 ferries that have ran aground to then prevent sinking. So you can see this. And when we have a look on the deck, it gives us a good idea of what hit. This is the second one. This is it listing. And then we have the deck here. Now, you can see that this is looking like it has been hit with cluster ATACMS. Now, ATACMS in the configuration that Ukraine have, they're not going to take down something like the Kerch Strait Bridge, but will have a effect on something like this. The level of damage, we don't know yet. It's listing, but it has also run aground. So we have no real idea of the amount of damage there. But I will say for the size of the attack with ATACMS, drones, whatever, I think the opportune targets maybe weren't in the, you're not sending out multiple waves of these drone boats to hit a pilot ship and 2 or more speedboats. I think that it may have been intercepted. We aren't sure, but let's have a look then at the footage. And I apologize, I'll mute the music because I don't know why music has to be added to these, but this is from the unit, and you will see the amount of assets being used in the sky to try and then counter these. So group 13. So you will see choppers up in the air trying to engage it. We are on this here, and you will see exploding shells landing to try and frag these up here as well, either of some sort of craft or the chopper in the air, as well as that looked like strafe from this chopper here. As well, there was said to be Su-27s in the air. So multiple airborne assets here. And this is something that, remember this time last year, or actually earlier in this last year, I asked someone in the Navy of like, what would we do against these? And I said, the only way really, if it's targeting ships, you need to hit it away from the ship. If it's near the ship, it's too late. You need to get choppers in the air to try and hit these. And we have seen Russia conduct training against these exactly like that as well. And you can see more footage of helos in the air and then attempting to strike these. We don't know how many of these were actually then hit in the water as well. like how many were hit then to have a strike. Now we see this firing out here. Now, some are saying this is Russia trying to engage these. I am not convinced. Is this the multi-launch rocket system thing we have seen aboard these drones? It's about as accurate as what we saw. One skip, so you can see what I think. You see how these are skipping off the water here? Now, it potentially could just be like a big AA gun by Russia as well trying to hit these. I don't know. But that does look very similar to some of the patterns we saw of these drone boats with the multi-launch rockets on them as well. I don't know. And then we see these are these two KS-701s here. And then a strike against it there as well. So massive explosion. Of course, these can take down a much larger ship. And like I said, I believe these were maybe alternate targets. I don't believe that these were the primary targets they were going after. It just doesn't seem the risk, cost, reward to hit those boats. I don't know. I could be incorrect, but interesting to see those weapon systems being used out in these areas, as we have seen have an influence here. But what is the influence then for the rest of the war? Well, we will then see. So I will say, and I probably should have mentioned this in the beginning, we don't have any map updates. Surak hasn't given any. Deep State hasn't given any. I will give them as it comes, and I may add on to the end here. But Legends, I hope that you have a fantastic end to the week, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.